One of the ways of advancing in watercolor, improving your watercolor skills, is extending the range of the subjects you paint. And in this one, I'm going outside of my comfort zone. If you've seen any of my previous painting subjects, they're fairly safe, in inverted commas, not too difficult scenes regarding landscape and seascapes. But this one is a bit of a challenge. This is a photograph very kindly shared with me by one of my Patreon members, Sandra. Thanks very much, Sandra, for this shot of Shanghai in the mid-90s, I think it is, Sandra. And a rainy day, cyclists, but a group of cyclists here, reflections in the rain, some drab buildings in the background, a bus as well to contend with, a lorry. But cyclists, how are you at painting cyclists? Do you tend to avoid them, or even figures? Do you tend to avoid figures? But we've got loads of figures here with their capes on, and trying to get these bicycle shapes right, convincing with those elliptical shapes of the wheels. So yes, my name is Tim Wilmot, watercolor painter, watercolor tutor, creating videos up here on YouTube and Patreon. Hope you like this video. It's a step-by-step complete process, bit of a longer one, this one, because it's quite detailed. But I'll go through the whole painting process with you, with the discussion of the composition and the outline drawing, and then laying in the wash, and I'll describe all the colors I'm using. I'm going to be using, because this is I think it's like a sort of black and white photo, I'm going to be going with a just burnt sienna, neutral tint, burnt sienna, lavender, which actually is quite a nice sort of grey when it's mixed with burnt sienna, and at the end a tiny bit of white paint. So hope you like it. Let's get started. Paper I'm using is Saunders Waterford. This is cold press, or NOT, 300 grams, 15 inches by 11 inches. I've got it taped down. It's not stretched. And first step is putting in the outline drawing, which may take, because of the complexity of the fact that we've got lots of cyclists, different shapes of cyclists with their capes and the background buildings and the perspective of the scene. I need to spend a little bit of time making sure it's right. So I might be drawing it a little bit, or I'm drawing a little bit lighter than I normally would, but I'm going to go in darker shortly. But just get in. I started first of all with the rise of the background buildings going up to the top right corner, and then these groups of cyclists trying to just think about their shapes, almost like the triangular shape of the cape, and then coming down to the bicycle below them. Base of the cape. And I might be jumping around this as I spot something. I might just quickly go back to it and strengthen up that drawing. This is the main figure here. And I've started with the top of the cape, the hood, and then the face, shadow either side of the face, just sort of in the recess of the hood, bit of shadow framing the face, and the right hand side on this one, this figure's grabbing the handlebar with the left arm, and then the right arm is underneath the cape. There's the right hand side, it's draped over this tricycle. And then the front handlebars, they're not straight, they've got a little bit of a they sort of curve upwards left and right from the front handlebar stem, and then we've got a bit of a basket to his right. This is the handlebar stem that's about the middle there. Just come down to, and there's a sort of object over the front wheel there. Not sure what it is. Maybe there's some sort of rack over the front wheel, and then the actual front wheel itself, just getting the curve of that right. Might need to adjust it later on. We're looking at a, it's not completely head on, so they're just a little bit difficult to try and get right the elliptical shape, not a perfect circle, just a bit of an elliptical shape. And then this is a tricycle, so we can't actually see the back wheel, but we've got a bit of the left wheel, or right wheel to the cyclist, left wheel to us. A bit of the mechanism, the frame of the bike here underneath the figure, and that left-hand wheel. And I need to also think about the placement of that wheel in relation to the front one, just so it does look right, coming towards us and not too far forwards. Here's the right-hand cyclist, got a slightly different cape in that this one looks like it's this guy's got a separate hat, and not so pointy at the top, a bit more of a rounded top to it, and then the cape down the left-hand side of the figure and draped over the handlebars. Then the front wheel of this one. Draw it in lightly first of all, then go in a bit harder. I'm using a 3B pencil, so it gives a bit of a dark line. It's quite thick as well. I find if I had a thinner pencil, it might damage the paper. So I do find that with the 3B, being quite soft, it doesn't damage the paper at all. Right, back wheel, just lightly first of all. Needs to be a little bit closer. Let's strengthen up the front wheel again. And then the back wheel needs to be just behind that, the upright of the frame. Something like that there. That's a bit better. It was too far back before. It looked as if the wheelbase was just a little bit too long. Yeah, that's a bit better. So I'm spending a bit of time trying to get these wheels right. It's very important to make them look like convincing bicycles that they wouldn't fall over. Right, there's a little figure just behind, I think it's a female figure, just behind the main cyclist in the middle, excuse me, and we can just see a little bit of the wheel poking out. I'm doing a bit of heavy cross-hatching there where the shadow is going to be. I'll paint over that. Doesn't I mean, you won't see the pencil marks afterwards in there. Just down the front of the cape, it's sort of gathered together at the top, in the middle. And then this right-hand figure to strengthen up some of the shadow, mainly on the left-hand side of the face. I'm going to give that middle, that cyclist has just done, I give that one a bit of a cape on that one as well. Now, behind the main cyclist, there's a group of them together. Again, just draw them in lightly and then strengthen up the outline shapes when I've got it right. Some of them are a little bit, some of their heads are just a little bit higher than others, but get in the head. I start off with the head first of all, and then the cape. Bottom of the cape, jagged edge, and just crudely draw in where the bicycle is going to be. This guy looks as if he's just sort of turning slightly right, so the wheel's at a bit of an angle. Top of the cape, not exactly sure whether, well, this one's going to be maybe just a little bit behind the left-hand one, and then this figure to the left and well behind the main central figure. Just see that one poking his head forwards, and then on the left-hand side, receding into the distance. There's one there. Strengthen up those lines. Using the heads as some guides. Now, the heads do a little bit, they're sloping, the tops of the heads are sloping a tiny bit from top right to bottom left as we go to the back of the street. There's the furthest couple of cyclists on the left, on the extreme left. The lorry is about here, top of the cabin, and the windscreen and the back of the lorry is there. Let's strengthen up the windscreen a bit. And the bus, which has got this, looks like a sort of bendy bit in the middle, which is giving us a nice bit of darkness to emphasize the light hitting that right-hand cyclist. So I'll just move that there. So I've moved it just a little bit from the source photo. And then the bottom of the bus, the wheel arch of the bus. There's a doorway. Maybe another wheel there. And windows, not too precise, but I need to think about where there is a door. Just getting these windows coming a bit wider towards us, a little bit wider apart. Get this wheel arch right. Again, drawing slightly lighter and then going a bit heavier once I think I've got the right position. Now these buildings, they're just rectangular blocks going down into the distance, quite a sort of repeating, quite a nice repeating pattern going down into the distance, so we can see the edges of the buildings in nearby, but then as they go into the distance, they almost, these individual blocks almost become as one. Strengthen up these lines of these near us, and something going on in the top right corner. I'm not sure what, but it's just the front of another block. The distant horizon just lightly drawn in there. I'm not going to necessarily draw in every single element of of things like the street furniture and the street lamps and vertical. I think there must be sort of electric, or I guess they're electric or telephone pylons going down the street. That's all going to be dark there where I've done the cross hatching. Yeah, I think this wheel needs to be a bit bigger. We need to go a bit lower there. It was looking a bit too small in relation to the left-hand wheel. And then there's some reflections of the wheels, just a little sort of upside down U. Get this right-hand hat just looking right. It's like, this is like including about 7 or 8 portraits in one watercolor. It's quite challenging to get their faces correct and the bodies correct and the bikes looking realistic, in motion and wet in the wet as well. Crosshatch where the legs are going to be. On that one, left leg, right leg, and then the front wheel. That cyclist is a bit easier because we're almost looking right at the front. There's no elliptical shape to consider on that one compared to the middle one and the right hand one. They're the more difficult ones. Right, that these background figures, just tidy up that, do a few little lines for the wheels and something in the distance. Make the tops of the buildings stronger. Just make sure I can certainly see the edges, the corners of the buildings when I start painting, so I'm just strengthening up those lines. Front of the buildings, there's some balconies, just drawing the front view as a guideline. Top of the bus, crosshatch there just to make that stronger. Main cyclist in the middle, this pointy hat, strengthen that up. That's the drawing done. Got to make sure I'm happy with that before going on to paint. And sticking to my limited palette on this one, which is just going to be neutral tint, burnt sienna, and the lavender and a bit of white I'll use to touch on the end. Now wetting the sky, or the top portion of the painting here with a soft brush. And this brush is what I'm going to be using for the initial wash. So I'm just making sure there's an even application of that clear water. My palette, so on the right hand side, my palette, I'll go through all of the colours, but I'm only going to use a selected few for this limited one. So from the top is neutral tint, then burnt umber, burnt sienna, yellow ochre, viridian green, cobalt green, cerulean blue, cobalt blue, ultramarine blue, alizarin crimson, Windsor red, light red, cadmium orange, and lemon yellow. And then down the bottom I've got my lavender, mixing in that middle well there. This sky, the sky is going to be one of the lighter parts of the painting, so I'm trying to look at the source photo and identifying what will I leave unpainted and what will be very light, and where will the darkest areas be. Well, the darkest areas will be on the cyclists, the lower part of the cyclists, and below their capes and the bicycles, they'll be quite dark. This is my initial wash, just really covering up the whole paper, apart from those areas that I may want to be quite careful at painting, or are going to be white, like the top of the bus. So I've just come down to painting over the background buildings, coming down to the top of the bus. And that's the top right-hand corner apartment, which I'll keep quite simple, side of the bus. Which will be darker towards the bottom of the bus, but this is just the top part of it, but leave that very top of the bus unpainted. Now the road is also quite light, and this is where, while it's damp, I can be adding in the dark reflections of the cyclist and the bus. So going over, make it a little bit darker to the right hand side. So it's lightest over on the left hand side, a little bit darker here, just a tiny bit. Keep applying more paint if I want it to go a bit darker. Cover up the main bits of the capes. Some of the top capes are fairly light, and as the cape comes down to the handlebar, they might be catching a bit of light from above. Just darken up that right hand one a tiny bit. Carefully mop up the bottom of my paper where the paint's accumulating a little bit, just so it doesn't run back up the paper. I've got my paper on a slight slope of about 10 degrees, as I normally do for videos like this, just a little bit of a slope, so the paint will come down ever so slowly. Now, smaller brush, thicker paint, less water, more pigment, same combination of colours though. And with my palette, there's, in these mixing wells in the corners, there's I really don't know what the colours are anymore, but there's some darker stuff from previous paintings. So sometimes a good idea not to be ultra clean with cleaning the palette. There can be some interesting colours left behind. Now, I could use a bigger brush for this, but my paper size isn't massive, and the paper is quite damp, so the paint's spreading as I go in there, and you won't really see the brush marks. That's the reflection of the central bendy bit of the bus, if that's the right term. Some reflections in the distance now, going over to the left hand side up to the two furthest cyclists. I'm putting in mainly little short horizontal marks here because there are some lighter horizontal marks going across. There are some lighter where the wheels are going through the rain. There's little bits of light there behind the wheels that's just catching a light bit of spray. Right, continue on down here. Of course, with watercolor, you've got to go a bit darker than you think because the paint's going to dry lighter generally. Hopefully this will be dark enough. As you can see, I'm deciding to put in the main reflections first before doing the actual objects causing the reflection. I just personally find that easier to do it that way around. I know some other people might, if they're approaching a rainy street scene, they might actually drawing the main objects first and then perhaps dampen the paper or some other technique to get these soft edges. But I prefer to do it this way around. Benefit of having a good drawing first of all, then you can see what the objects are above. Hopefully it's just beginning to give the appearance of a damp road already. And then adding these reflections is just connecting these wheels and the bicycles to the road. Underneath the bus and that cyclist that's just behind the main one. And those lines might help to create the impression of us, well, some lines leading into the scene. So just help a little bit in giving the impression of some bicycles that have gone over that area already. They've made those lines. Make this here a bit darker. It's still fairly damp, the paper. With cotton-based paper, that's going to stay damper longer, so you've got a longer time to work at this before everything dries. As long as you're not in too dry a room, the relative humidity is, as long as it's not too low. Me in the UK, it's probably about the relative humidity in the room is probably about 50% where I am right now. Okay, background, where we'll just paint around the outline of the furthest cyclist just to define them. I need to keep this very light here in the distance. You can't really make out from the photograph what is in the background, but it's just a very light value there. Could be trees or distant buildings. And then I've painted around those two left-hand cyclists and a car in the gap between those two and the main group of cyclists. I've changed brushes now to a medium-sized mop brush. This is a squirrel mop brush, size 10 millimeters in diameter, and this will just help me cover up larger areas with paint. Do a bit of careful painting around this middle group of cyclists. So I'm painting in now the background buildings. around the cabin of the lorry. Keep that quite bright at the top. And then continue up the road. Paint down to the top of the bus, tops of the figures. Bit more burnt sienna. Give it a bit more colour in these buildings. On the right, closest to us, and down to the top of the roof of the bus. And this brush is quite good at creating an edge as well, as long as it's not too much paint on the brush. Get quite a good edge for a bit more careful painting around objects. So making the lower part of the bus a bit darker, down to the bottom, around that cyclist, around the right-hand cyclist. That's the lower, this is the lower bit of this guy's cape that is just folded over, it's sort of draped over the handlebars, and the lower bits are in a bit of shade there, not so light. Continue over to the rest of the bus, over that wheel arch. And it's a grimy, wet day, so the bus has got a bit of dirt over it. I'm using a small synthetic brush just to lift off some of the paint for the lines that the bicycle wheels have made in the wet surface. I'm just dipping in some water and making sure the brush is not too wet, but just wet enough to almost part the paint a little bit, very gently, just to create those light lines through the road. Check how dry the top of the paper is. Now I'm using a saw brush or dagger brush now for the top foliage. I find that quite a nice brush to get in sort of leaf shapes and drawing in twigs as well. And it does hold quite a bit of paint as well. It's got a good, it retains a lot of paint. So very loosely describing the arching branches that are coming over the street, and a few of them are just extending over, and a group of leaves. Trying to be as random as I can, not too precise, not too perfect. Some areas are lighter, some areas are darker. And just sort of stabbing at the paper, you get these leaf-like shapes. Can't see too much there, my hands blocking your view, but just the edge of the brush, you create these fairly realistic bunch of leaves. That creates quite a nice little, from a composition point of view, quite a nice frame, if you like, to that top left corner. Back to the small brush again, and starting from the left-hand side, drawing in these cyclists, these distant ones, darker faces, darker shadows under the capes. Just tease out some of the face colour to the top bit of the cape where it's a little bit steeper in an angle and it's not catching too much of the light, but then go a lot darker with the base, the bottom of the capes and the bicycles. Be quite loose with those far cyclists. You're just thinking of the shapes of them, really. Couple of legs and then connect with the reflection. In here, there's another cyclist. Again, far away, don't need to be too precise with this. And then the bottom of the cape, dark. Coming now to the main group of cyclists, and the shadow around the face, first of all. With the faces, I'm just leaving out a little bit of the paper where the light's catching, maybe noses and lips. This is quite an important part of the painting now. Trying to be fairly loose with the bottom bit, the darker bottom bits of the capes and the bicycles. just to try and make them look convincing as a group of cyclists in motion. That's a bit of shadow underneath that cape, just where I presume it's just draped over the handlebars. It's just a bit of a softer edge as it bends over. Some marks down the bottom. If I find something's a bit too hard an edge or too dark in colour, I might just quickly either lift it off with a finger or, as I did there, smudge it in just to give a bit of a soft edge. Got to be a bit careful not to make it look overworked. That gives a bit of a contrast then with the cyclist's head, the top of their cape. Now this is the lorry. Yeah. Side of the cabin, top of the windscreen. Right hand side, bottom of the windscreen. And then down to the edge of that guy's cape, then the front of the front grille of the lorry, side of that lorry going a bit darker just to create the edge of those cyclists. Right, this one, start with a shadow around the face, just framing the face down the right hand side. I just picked up a bit of clear water there. That line was too strong, so I just picked up a bit of clear water and almost lifted off and spread that darker paint out over the building. Right, back to this figure. The folds of the cape coming out from the face. A bit more of that radiator, the front grille. And now for the buildings and the tops of the buildings, bit of shadow at the top on the edge of the roof tops. I think the trick with these buildings is not have too much detail, just to give the implication of windows and balconies. So very, very soft line there for that, for those balconies of the near building. This needs to be a little bit darker in there. Come down to the top of the head. Likewise, that one, just bring down the building colour to the top of the lorry. Just in here, we'll have a little car. Couple of lines, just hopefully give the impression of the windscreen and the bottom of the car. Back to the bus. Let's get into some windows. Start of the central bit of trim across the top, some bits and pieces on top of the bus. There could be ventilation. In the windows. To strengthen that right hand side of the head and the frames of these windows. I'll not block them all out, just give, again, quite loosely, when you look at the windows there, they're not a solid rectangular colour, they're subtle. I think there might be some curtains or reflections of something, maybe the opposite side of the street. So I need to just create the impression of those windows. Paint around this hat, go quite dark, and that bit, then continue on with the windows. Up to the right hand side. Tiny bit of detail inside the lorry. Maybe a driver, back of the cab. Just a bit of darkness to the bottom of that windscreen. Another face, side shadows first. Framing the face. And this one, Some of the capes, some of the hoods, they've got a little peak at the front, which I'd imagine should be just the job when you're in the rain. Bit more protection. So a bit more shadow underneath the face, a few more lines for the folds of the capes. If those lines are a bit too, if the edge is too hard, I can just pick up a bit of water and soften them up a bit. Just apply a bit of paint around that figure just to define the feature of the figure, and then the underneath of the cape, block this off a bit more. Connect that front grille of the lorry to that figure's face. Just connect them up, so not leaving a light edge around the figures. Right, swapping over to a bigger brush now. And the main figure's cape. Bit of dark shadow. I need to keep the left arm of that figure quite light because it's stretched out, grabbing the handlebar. This figure behind, at front of the cape, and face. I've just left a little bit of the paper showing through, which could be the nose there. Just see how that works. Don't want to make it too bright, stand out too much. So picking up some darker paint now for the bottom bits of the bikes. And I've got this brush is quite good at getting that edge as well. which I can create these almost drawing in a way with a sort of wide nib pen, similar to that. Getting this figure's legs, and then just continue over. They're all connected with each other. And then over to the main cyclist and this tricycle. So before I paint the lower part of this main cyclist, I'll start with the face first of all. And this figure's got a bit of a extra covering on the peak. It sort of curves down, covering the bit of the face. Right hand side, left hand side. And then under the chin. A few folds over the left arm. And down to the bottom of the cape. Right hand figure, face first of all. Different sort of hat. Almost it looks like it's just a separate, this cyclist has got a cape but then a separate hat. A few more folds, handlebars, bottom of the cape. Bottom bit of the bust, just dry brush marks, but just up to the edge of the cyclist to create the shape of just to strengthen up the shape of the cyclist. Right, just colour in the face a bit more. Leave a little bit of highlight for the nose and the mouth. There we are. And then this one, we just see the edge of this cyclist and the head. I'll give it a hood as well. In the photograph, this figure doesn't have a hat, but I'll give it a hat. Continue on now with the main tricycle, the main bicycle here, the underneath. You just really, from the photograph, you can't really, because of the definition, you can't see exactly what's in there, but we can see maybe a little bit of the frame, the basket on the side or at the back. So the left-hand leg of that cyclist. Bottom of the mudguard. Right, this one here. Front forks. Top of the wheel. There's that cyclist just behind the main one. Back to the small brush, which is a little bit easier for doing wheels and smaller details. Just strengthen up some of these reflections a bit more. The paint's dried a tiny bit too light for my liking, so just go over these a little bit. Smudge it if it's, or just lift off with a finger if it's got a bit too dark. Strengthen up that car there. The reflections, just the top bit of it where it touches, where it's connected to the wheels. So that's the rear wheel and the front wheel. And then the reflection, just the first little bit of it, and drag the brush down just so that it just peters out and disappears. Right-hand wheel of this tricycle, something like that, and then the other side, and the front wheel here. Yeah, it needs to be, that's about right, I think. That's a bit too, the diameter was a bit too small on the drawing. And this front wheel, you can't really see the spokes, it's almost blocked out. Almost a solid shape. And reflections of that wheel. Now handlebar and handlebar stem. Cape sort of draped between his legs, goes down between his legs. There's a bit of a shadow there. Face on that fast cyclist. Wheels for right-hand cyclist, just following the lines. It's okay actually if I just leave a bit of a break in the rim of the wheel. Gives the impression of a tiny bit of movement. And then the front and rear forks, bit of the frame. And then connect with the ground. That instantly stops it hovering in midair. And likewise a bit of connection with the background of the underneath of the bus. A few lines on the road, rub them out if they're too strong. Need to add a bit more definition to the underneath of the bus and that wheel arch. And then there's a doorway here. Just make some of these faces a bit darker so I can add a bit more contrast so the features like a nose will stand out just a little bit more. Just a lot of these faces are just a tiny bit too dark at the moment. Some balconies and details on those blocks, those apartment blocks. A few more verticals, the electricity poles or whatever they are, and some windows. There's actually a tree on the other side. I could have done that, but then it might have been a bit too much detail for the background. But just another object to sort of create some contrast with the light roof of the bus. Got a bit darker on that central bit joining the two parts of the bus. Bring it down as well, connect with the face of the figure. Some of these windows could be just a little bit darker in places, just around the frame. I think there's a doorway there at the end, which just helps me bring that down to the edge of that cape. Just helps me define that a bit more. And then there's some trim up the side of the bust. It's just a dry brush mark there. Needs to be a bit darker, but tiny bit, catches a bit of light at the top. What I'm doing now is going around. I need to strengthen up some of these faces with a bit more definition of noses, mouths. Then that figure, yeah, this one needs to be a bit darker. Looked like a ghostly skeleton before. And this one needs to be defined a bit more as well. Bottom of the face, front of the cape. Tiny bit of darker shadow under the nose and the lips. This is the main figure, so I want to get this one as best I can. Bit of shadow or lines on the hoods. Be careful not to overdo those background ones. Keep them nice and simple. Now there are some street lights that are on, that sort of curve over into the road. I'll just paint in a few of those. Another light there, a few more in the background. Strengthen up the reflection of some of these cyclists, just a little bit too light. Not too much paint on my brush now, so it's not going to create too harder marks. Bit more shadow under the bus. Then that's the reflection of the darker bit in the arch, the wheel arch of the bus. Lighter reflection for those wheels. That's the front bit of the cape that's draped over the handlebars. Needs to be a bit darker. A bit darker on the face. Just get the hairdryer out here to dry things up before the next stage. This face needs to be a little bit more paint on it, just to make it a little less severe. That face is a little bit too light as well in places. And that's it done. As I normally do, just a little critique of the painting afterwards. So painting out of my comfort zone, from a point of view of lots of cyclists, a rainy day as well. I don't do many of those. It's all down to timing when you're painting watercolor, but I've added a few finishing touches after I stopped filming to the Cyclists. So I just strengthen up some of the faces just a little bit, just to, this guy still looks a little bit like a skeleton or something. But yes, I'm quite pleased with the main figure there, and the other figures as well. Just getting in the placement of those figures correctly. I moved them up a little bit in compared to the photograph. I moved up the horizon just a little bit higher up so I could get more of the wheels in. They were a little bit lower in the photograph. Strengthened up some of the bust details. Added a little bit, tiny bit of white paint. Just a very tiny bit just on the tops of the wheels that were catching the light. Maybe a little bit of tiny paint. You've got to be very careful. I'm on the verge of overdoing it here in this one. Bit of light on the rack on this guy's bicycle. Touch of light there, and a few little horizontal lines as well. Not very bright, these. They were quite almost like a greyish, milky sort of a colour there for some of these lines. So there you are, Cyclists in the rain in Shanghai, mid-90s, limited palette. Catch up with you on the next video.